Yeah.
One thing that we can do as well, if we don't want it just on YouTube, is I can't remember off the top of my head how to do this quickly, but you can have your gitbook sync with a GitHub account. So I could upload all that to my GitHub account, or if we wanted a GitHub account for DAOpunks or whatever, that way it can be saved somewhere in addition to YouTube.
Yeah, maybe probably make a backup copy for like cold storage. I mean, once it's uploaded to YouTube, it's just really easy to just go and download the video file for like cold storage purposes if we need to.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll at a minimum get those onto my GitHub as well, just so there are multiple places that it's saved.
And yeah, just I guess Michael, just send me and Garrett credentials to log in, and I'll convert the audio files into a video, and I'll just put up a graphic. I'll put up a simple Dalpunks graphic on it. Yeah, no, I got you. Just follow the same theme that you were going on previously. Cool.
Anyway, Crypto Bushi, did you? I can't remember where I sent the message. I'm losing today. Did you want to make a like generic core team account that and have that as like the fifth one that has access to this? Do you want access to the Gitbook right now?
So how does that work? So basically it's like I think you said what, 5 people can be on it or something like that?
Yeah, so right now I just did the minimum team size, which was 5 different accounts. So right now it's me, Garrett, Maiko, and then I also added Live Fast Just Barely. So we
Maybe
still have another one.
let's just leave that one for now then. Maybe because we might have another contributor that slides in here kind of last minute. Maybe we'll use that slot for them.
Okay, cool. Yeah, if you decide you want one, just let me know.
Okay, cool.
Also, I hit Hiro up about it the other day, but he hadn't gone back to me. Did we set up DAOpunks? Do we have is it a nonprofit, or what was the final um, legal entity?
Yeah, so DAOpunks, he's trying to get it set up to be filed as a nonprofit, but no, it's not currently. That's probably going to be a longer road than maybe what he's even thinking, to be honest.
Okay.
And you never know,
Cool.
just because we file as a nonprofit doesn't mean that we ever actually get recognized as one. So I don't know, it's a dream that Hiro has, but I don't know how practical it is. But we'll just keep giving it a shot.
Cool.
I have a question. Is this the grants working group?
Yes,
I think I was
it
just
is.
following it. Okay, sorry, I was just a little bit confused from the conversation, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah, no, it doesn't really sound like it right now. So that's because we were talking about getting all of like the uh, grants framework and everything. I've been putting it into Gitbook. Um, So we were just making sure that everyone who had asked for access had it right now.
Yeah, and I think if you are paying for anything, like I know you said you paid for this, I guess just keep a running tab of it, and then at some point through this process, we'll just reimburse you for that.
Awesome. Yeah, it's one of those things where I'm like, I want to try this more, and I'm just gonna do it. So
Yeah,
those things where you're
you
like,
guys
if I get
need it.
reimbursed, awesome. If I don't, awesome.
No, we're not going to make you front that. So just you know, definitely within reason. So don't go out and buy like something ridiculous. But yeah, if you guys need certain tools and stuff, then just let us know.
I'm so excited to have a unified like collection of documentation for us. And yeah, so thanks for doing that. It's going to be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I think before you guys talk about some of this other stuff, I just want to kind of just bring up that talk today that we had with Mantis Clone. I thought that was super interesting. I know Micah was there. And I think maybe some other people were there. I thought it was super interesting how they had like all of that stuff was like open source, like their whole curriculum and everything. Um, and I was just kind of wondering, like, I know one of our conversations was like, well, what do we have these people do exactly, like during this grant program, right? Um, and I mean, there are some of these like really great programs that are already being put on, like by like Gitcoin and all that stuff. I wonder if like, do we kind of piggyback off them? Like, do you guys think that would be smart to where it's like, okay, maybe we like provide a grant to somebody that's going through kernel, and then I mean those types of people are probably the most likely people that would actually stay in the space.
Well, I think we
Yeah.
should absolutely
So I
invite them.
actually, yeah, I mean, I love the idea, especially because you're like, we're not giving that specialized knowledge or like a curriculum like some of these other programs are. You've got like Developer DAO and Ethernaut DAO and like some really cool DAOs that are like putting you through mentorships and pairing you one on one with GigaBrains and all that. And I think that it's like that's where you're going to get some of the knowledge that's like really technical about what you want to do. And I see us as kind of that emotional and financial support at the beginning, and then like being able to help people get through the generalized type stuff where it's like, I'm not going to help you with Solidity code. I wish I could, but I can't. And so be participating in these other things as well. But yeah, especially like with kernel being open source with all the curriculum and everything too. Even if they're not accepted into the kernel, they can still, like, if we push them towards that and say, hey, this is a really, like, think about going through this. I think it'd be really helpful for them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just almost thinking like, what if we made it part of the requirements for this grant? Like you have to prove that you are going to be going through some sort of structured curriculum, and like maybe we don't tell them exactly which one, right? Like maybe they go through kernel, maybe they go through ethernauts, maybe they go through some of these other stuff. We let them tell us what curriculum they're going to go for, and then we decide if we think that curriculum is worthy or not. And then if it is, it's like, okay, we don't have to worry about like the education side, because yeah, I don't think any of us here really ever intended to be the educators. I think like we're more going to be like support, right? Like when there's tough days and people want to quit, they can come and talk to us, and maybe we can change their mind. But really they need like a place to go and actually like take some value away. I know everybody's different, but I feel like this would solve our problem of like, oh, how do we how do we find the people that we actually think have staying power? And I think anybody who's like going to go through kernel, they're probably got some pretty strong staying power, because it sounded like from Mantis Clone that like it's pretty legit, and it takes a lot of time as well. And so if you
Um,
finish it,
Oh, and one thing we could with it as well is like, um, this morning in the chat, it was like, hey, what value, like, what are we getting out of it? And we don't want to make this completely transactional, but if you're going through Kernel, like as a grantee, every once a week or every other week, do 3 sessions where um, you do something like what Mantis Clone did. And obviously, I don't know exactly like how it looked this morning because I haven't seen it yet. But it's like have 3 lessons that they have to do, and that way they can help teach the rest of the community. And we also know that they're at least on a path that moves them forward and sets them up for success.
Yeah, and I think it would be I think it would be really valuable for these other programs too, because like they probably are lacking in some degree of like documenting the experience because they're so busy putting on the actual event, right? And so they're probably not doing a great job at like actually documenting it all. And so we could almost act as like a documenter, a historian for these different people going through this journey. And if these people are successful in their journey from kernel or any of these other curriculums, it's almost like it's a social signal back to those programs as well, which would then probably make our program have a higher chance of getting additional funding from outside sources because it kind of feeds the whole ecosystem.
I had a couple of questions in regards to that. So one, I don't know whether or not that would be the best mode of action, is because because people participate in environments that they feel that they can bring the most value. So I think that in providing an emotional support system is great, but I guess the question is like, how does that help the DAO punks community as a whole? I think that also um, in developing this grant, it probably for like long lasting is maybe providing this grant geared towards those that have already participated in DAOs or have like become self starters and like created some sort of resources for DAOs or this particular ecosystem, because that already has the like foundation or like proof of concept to show that those people have actually been working in this ecosystem and could add value not only outside but most importantly inside, because like as we have already seen is that there are tons of DAO punks who in IRL will wear the t-shirts and meet one another, but our Discord and our like digital community isn't really like contained. So yeah, I'm first I want to know whether or not you're actually open to different ideas on how these grants could be measured and the KPIs, or if y'all are just kind of set in a particular direction of it just being like a public good.
I mean, I think just to answer that one question with the value, I think the value that it could provide the community would be like if if we provide grants to people who actually go out into the ecosystem and build meaningful products, then they're forever going to probably have some sort of allegiance back to DAO punks to some degree because we supported them in those early days. And so I think the value that could be extracted from that would be like, what if early Vitalik Buterin got a grant from DAO punks and then went on to go build Ethereum Foundation? Like, all the people that are kind of in the community now and kind of participated during that would potentially have, relationships with Vitalik at that point. You know what I mean? So it's not like a direct value, but it's like a social value. I could see that being something very interesting.
Yeah, and so I totally understand your questioning of like, hey, let's get some KPIs so we can actually measure this. Um, the reason why, at least initially, we don't want to focus on like certain KPIs is because we really don't want to accidentally bias the applications and the KPIs towards a developer, because you're like, hey, we don't care if you're a developer or an artist or a community manager or whatever. Um, we don't have preference for what role you're going to run. And right now, I think it'd be really hard to like put KPIs in place that are specific without saying like, okay, if you're not a developer, if you're not XYZ, then we don't want you, if that makes sense.
Totally, but I think it's a linear approach in terms of value. Like, and I think that that's also kind of the problem with this space is like how value is measured is like priority in terms of development. But there's also other types of activities that I think that we could measure for people's participation and anticipation on whether or not they have a long-standing future in this space. And some of those things would be like participating as a writer for a Web3 project, or taking on a role within their DAO, or creating a service offering for their service DAO, or participating in a podcast. Like, I feel like that there are multitudes of different activities that people can be measured by. And also the reason by holding these KPIs is, one is that it adds value to the grant as itself rather than a charity. Some people are not that at best to describe their internal makeup, their archetypes, how they feel. Like, I feel that with some, like, especially like myself, I could be like, well, I've done all of this and I've added value this way, rather than me telling you about a story about who I am and what my vision of the world is. I also think that it adds a legitimacy and like a sustainability model towards our grant system, so that if we do become a nonprofit or a B Corp or whatever, we have some things to kind of rely on to say like, hey, this roadmap actually helps people, or it like, develops product, or it invests in like human capital in this way or through partnerships. And I think that merging those real life kind of criterias that exist in grants with this particular space of saying like, okay, we want people to also be like a shoulder to lean on, but like that's also to assume that people will feel comfortable with the people within the community in order to do that, right? And so it's just like mitigating the risks and allowing much more diversification in the application process.
Yeah. So, you brought up a bunch of things. So, number one, it's not like a charity where there are no expectations. So, you kind of brought up like writing some sort of writing uh, newsletter, something like that. So that is one of the expectations, is that um, there will be at least one like major newsletter article, Medium article, going on a podcast with DAO Punks, like something like that, where it's not only going over, kind of what they have been doing and working on and which other DAOs, because obviously we don't expect the grant recipients to just like try to work in DAO Punks. So it'll kind of go over what they've done, what their projects have been, how they've made it so they're actually now working sustainably in the DAO space. But also, kind of going over the things that they didn't expect, some of the things that they've learned, some of the things that they probably could have done better, resources that they have found that we can then, curate for the rest of the community, so that it's not just, oh, they got $2,000 and then they didn't come back crying because they can't pay their bills, but really like what the process they went through. And that's part of the reason why the second distribution is we're going to have it determined by Coordinate, so that like if somebody isn't going through the stuff that they're like learning and struggling with, and kind of like coming back to the community to like inform us of that, so that we can go out to other DAOs and say, hey, we need help with this, we need Opolis to help us out for all of our grantees, or things like that. If the grant recipient doesn't come back with that kind of stuff, then they're not going to get as much in the Coordinate round, and that's the second half of their distributions. So I think that with some of those things that we're doing, it should, well, and also the other thing that you brought up a couple times, they should already be working in a DAO and know kind of what they're getting into. Absolutely. This is not a grant for somebody who says like, hey, I've been working as a developer and Ethereum sounds cool. And so I want to try it. Like this should be for the person who's already working in a DAO and they're doing, 10 hours a week. And they're like, oh, if I could just have a little bit of a cushion so that I can make that transition from 10 hours a week to however many they need. That's the kind of person we're looking for, not just somebody who's interested in the space.
Yeah, to that point, actually, I wanted to bring up that just because we want to keep the applications kind of open and attract a lot of people to apply, doesn't mean that everyone's going to actually be granted anything. I think the natural the selection process, as long as we do our job right and have a clear criteria of, things we've described already, like have experience with DAOs, know what you're getting into, that type of thing. As long as we have a clear expectation of what we want from applicants, only the top 3, which I imagine will be chosen based on how qualified they are, how clear, their vision is. But I think the process itself will only select the people that are most ready to receive it. But to your point, one thing that I really liked, I was checking out a bunch of different grants programs in the space, and I could share the screen with you guys if you want, but this is actually from the Ethereum Foundation. It's part of the ecosystem support program for small grants. And one of the questions that really stood out, on their application is, what, basically the way they phrase it is, they have a space for you to answer, but it's proposed tasks, roadmap, and budget. It says, give us an itemized breakdown how you'll be using the funds, a timeline of the expected work, and a list of the main objectives or tasks that you anticipate. I think that it clears up the issue that Stubbs brought up. We don't want to predefine a roadmap or predefine, okay, we need these KPIs. But I think as part of the application, we should let people define their own KPIs, their own checkpoints, so that we could measure them effectively.
Yeah, that would solve basically what I was trying to solve by saying they should go through a curriculum. Because my only concern is that like if these people have no like idea like what they're gonna do, then like what's the point? You know what I mean? And if we're not telling them and they're not telling us, then it's like, well, what are we doing? Right.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely have to state what the goal is, but I think the specific question of laying out either a KPI, a roadmap, or specific checkpoints. I'll definitely share the phrasing and the site with you guys. You could see it. I'll drop the link now, but I think that's a necessary part of this, so it's not too vague where we have no idea.
Yeah, and that'll also self-select people out of applying because that will take a lot of thought. And
Yeah.
people that aren't serious are gonna just be like, I'm not gonna do that.
Well, that was my first point, that people will self-select as long as we do the application, set it up properly, is that where it will require thoughts, but also the actual selection process of narrowing it down to the top 10 or so, and then the votes will obviously select out people that are too vague or too optimistic or unrealistic, etc. That's how I see it.
So then what you're saying is basically once we select the grantees, then each individual grantee will theoretically already laid out their own KPIs. And then we basically are just kind of along for the ride at that point.
Yeah, I mean, that's how the Ethereum Foundation has it set up on their application. Let me drop the link for you guys.
Yeah, and I would say it's almost that, not quite, because we do have, or at least we have been saying that they have to have, a couple things like the podcast, newsletter, whatever, and that engagement with the community. So, where at least they're kind of updating us on it so that we can try to help and all that.
Well, that's the value that Fiends was asking about too. I mean, that's the value that DAOpunks is getting, is we're basically like documenting these journeys. And if somebody else is interested in doing the same thing, hopefully one day we'll have like a repository of various experiences.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
I have a question in regards to that. What if, like, apart from the newsletter, what if people wanted to do another thing out, like, but not that? Like, because I just say, like, not everybody's like a writer, and some people are better with like voice. So, like, how about if somebody wanted to do like a weekly AMA using the DAOpunks Discord instead of having a dedicated DAOpunks channel? Or if somebody wanted to do a Twitter Spaces series instead of sending the newsletter, like, do we have an openness of the types of community engagement program that the cohort can do instead of writing a newsletter or a journal or something like this? Are we open to that? I
Yeah.
guess is the question.
Well, and that what you're now asking about is exactly why we have been so hesitant to give like specific KPIs. Like the newsletter is just a suggestion. We want to make sure that the DAOpunk community is getting something out of it, learning what resources people did have, they thought they needed and they won't, the struggles they go through, so that the next person who says I want to go make this transition, they can see 10 different experiences, and be like, okay, cool, I have a better feeling for some of the things that maybe I need to consider before doing this, rather than it just being like, I know people have, I see people on crypto Twitter who are full time. I know that it's possible, but I don't know the experiences. So, absolutely, like the dedicated channel would be just so that like people can stay on topic about a certain person. But if they wanted to do a weekly Twitter space, if they wanted to do, some other things like a webinar where they're helping train some people on some stuff, like that's what we're looking for. But because each person is going to have different strengths, different things, they're like, oh, this is how I'm going to provide that value. That's why we haven't nailed it down.
Yeah, and
We're hoping for
I'm under the impression too that like I don't think we were ever thinking that they would actually write the newsletter content. I think we were more trying to lay out expectations that like we want to put together these newsletters, these podcasts, and these AMAs, not specifically that they're in charge of doing it, but like they need to be made available in order to help us produce that
Right,
content.
available to be interviewed. But and I was going to say the exact same thing, Bushi. We're not expecting them to write articles or, just for our newsletter team to be able to say, hey, can you do an interview, whether text, voice, Twitter, whatever the case is. There's no expectation they have to be a writer.
Well, I love that. I mean, I love the idea though. And so I think I would see KPIs more of like the roadmap. So somebody who is wanting to go full-time DAO, applying for this grant would indicate, this is my pathway of like how I would like to achieve it in the next 2 months, for like the how much that would have. This is what the grant would offer me. And these are sort of the resources that I would love to tap into DAOpunk. So then when you get it, it's like the person who's receiving the grant, you already know what they're doing, what they're trying to achieve, and how the community can help them. And then in terms of like the community engagement, I would see it as like a required criteria, right? And so that would be like creating a project, which would be like maybe a weekly update on their pathway for the newsletter or a Twitter Spaces or an AMA. And so then that way you make your KPIs of creating greater engagement within the DAO Punks community. And I think that that would be like two different things. One is whether or not we can assess the right candidates based on their application. And so that's where they would write their roadmap. And then the second would be, along with their personal roadmap, are they willing to fulfill the needs of the community, right? Which is one of the biggest gaps, is creating like engagement within it. And so that's kind of how I see it. And yeah, it is like a high expectations, but I think that at least with cohort 0, while still trying to figure out this grant process, how it's going to work, how it's going to flow, finding kind of the most ideal types of candidates who are kind of the self-starters who are able to do this, will be able to develop it in a way that would be much more open for people in different stages along the way.
No, well said. I agree.
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% on the same wavelength that we are, which is, showing the need for really pretty extensive documentation on all of this, because, despite sometimes we're like, oh yeah, we've had these, conversations, so like you don't want to make it too wordy where people can't get through it, because it's a reference almost, but a lot of people are newer, they weren't in the spaces when we were talking about it, things like that, where it's like, yeah, there's so much of this that I'm like, man, I've hammered on this day after day that, yes, preach, this is what I want. But it's not clear yet. So it's really, thank you for bringing up all of this again, because if you had asked me, I'm like, yeah, we need to get it on paper better, but like people know that that's what we're getting at. But yeah, no, I know that that's what I'm getting at, but we have to communicate that and put it down on paper as KPIs, as roadmaps, and all of that. So thank you.
And also, I'm not just like a person who's like, we should do this and like not do anything. Like, I have experience in creating like grant programs and like equitable voting structures and things like that. So if you need any help with like application, like terms or words or questions, like I'm here to help.
Like all the feedback that you're giving us is so much, like so appreciated. And one thing that I think really will help with us as well is like, it's one thing to talk about it, it's another when it's like, oh, let's, if a question is unclear or feels like it's not there, 100% feel like I'd love to have you send it over and be like, hey, I feel like this is unclear the way it's written. Here's the question that I would write it out, and these are the words that I would use. Because it is funny, because I've run some grant programs in the past too, but they were in person, and so it was less important to have it be so clear in the documentation. And even though I know that it has to be like there, because this isn't in person anymore, you fall back to what you're used to, subconsciously. So it's yeah.
Yeah, and themes, just to second what Stubb was saying, yeah, we definitely appreciate your involvement and feedback. And I'm glad you do have experience, but it's not like we would judge you if you didn't. I mean, a good idea is a good idea. And now that actually we fixed one of the little Discord issues, I actually can, pin posts and things now. So after this meeting, I'll make sure that all of the, the relevant docs, like the actual grant application with the questions that Mike was working on, or all the things that we're working on, the Gitbook, etc. Those will be pinned and easily accessible in the grants channel, so that for quick reference, for easy reference. So please do continue to engage. We love having you here.
And I think a lot of what's been brought up is going to be a part of the grant application explainer document that Stubbs is working on, right? So it seems like a lot of these points will be relevant in the drafting of that one.
Well, it is very helpful because I was trying partly to make it more 10,000 foot view, just because you constantly have feedback and when it's all digital, they're like, hey, you had a lot of great stuff on there, but like most people aren't going to read through it, and so make it easy and digestible. And I think I was going a little too far on the easy digestible spectrum of things. So
So I have a question for you guys. It's a question of the public visibility of application submissions. And the question is, like, obviously, some of them are going to be public. How many of them are going to be public? Are all of them going to be public, or are only the ones that the screening committee vets and puts forth going to be public? And then even then, here's the model that I'm working with, is that perhaps all of the submissions go to this private spreadsheet that only the grants committee has access to, and the applications that are made public are the 20 or so that the screening committee selects for DAO vote, but they scrape the contact information off so that basically all of the submissions are anonymous. Does that sound like a good way to do it?
So why would we want all of the submissions to be anonymous? I mean, if you're super active in the community, then you should get points for that.
Yeah, like their Discord handle should be on there, I think. But as far as like publishing their email address, for example, or like if they don't want to publish like their wallet address or something, which I don't know if we're even going to require the wallet address on the app. Maybe that's a second step after you accept. But yeah, I feel like we shouldn't publish email addresses, for example.
Yeah, so my thoughts are kind of either, I mean, I would almost say if anyone wants to go through submissions and look at them and give their feedback, let's let people do that. I think the biggest reason why we want to make sure that we have like a screening committee is just to 100% ensure that every application gets looked at. So it's not just like, oh, the first 15 got looked at by 10 different people each, but the last submission nobody looked at, so they didn't even have a chance. And so that's why we need to have a screening committee to make sure that every single one does get fully considered. But I mean, I am totally happy like opening up and saying, hey, if you want to help with these, like the community is the one voting on them at the end anyway. So having them help out and look at them in a pre-screening, I think makes sense.
Yeah, and I like the idea of like having the ability for like Discord contact information or something like that, because I could see situations where like maybe a specific person doesn't get a grant for whatever reason, but then maybe somebody else in the community recognizes, the situation, and maybe they reach out privately and set something up privately, like a different grant or something like that, and I want to enable those kind of situations to happen naturally if they can.
Okay, cool. So we don't think that there's any sort of privacy concerns with that then?
I mean, unless we're asking super private information, but I don't think we are. So it's kind of.
Yeah, I think that anything that, is personal that people put on there, it's going to be because they feel like that helps articulate and explain their story and why they want to go full-time DAO. And if that's part of their story, then awesome. But I don't, we're not going to require that it's like, hey, so how many kids do you have? What's your marriage status? Or anything like that that they potentially wouldn't want to release that we are asking for. So, yeah, let's not release all the emails and wallet address and everything, but everything else about it, I think it's like, yeah, let's put it out there so that connections can be made.
I had a question. How are you going to determine like that all of the grant recipients aren't all homogenous? Will there be like, do we include identifiers or like what's the plan in regards to diversifying the pick? Or
Well, it is a good point. One of the what's it called? The disclosures, or I don't know what you want to call it, but one of the things that we're going to put a set of expectations, like I don't want to say legal, but acknowledgments before submitting the application. One is a clear acknowledgement that it's one applicant per person per cohort. Any attempt to double your identities or whatever would be immediately disqualifying. But how do we actually prove it? I can understand that. My only solution to that, which I honestly think would probably be necessary anyway. I was going to bring this up on a separate discussion, but maybe Bushi, you can answer. I believe that we would need KYC in order to actually send people money for the grants, right? Like, wouldn't there have to be a KYC process?
I mean, I wasn't KYC for what he sent me, my ETH.
Yeah, I
Not
mean,
yet.
I don't know. I mean, if you ask a lawyer, sure, they'll probably give you a million things. I mean, honestly, I don't know. I mean, it
Unless I'm
depends how
forcefully told
legal you guys want
otherwise.
to go on this. If you guys want to go too legal on this, then you're gonna have a lot of people tell us we can't do this at all. So
Yeah.
Yeah, until I get like stopped and they tell me that I have to do it and they figure out who I am and blah blah blah. Which I mean, not hard, but I wouldn't worry about trying to do KYC.
I mean, if
All
we
right.
try
Well,
to KYC people, you're just gonna tank the DAO ethos right there because they're gonna be like,
Yeah.
oh, cool, that's totally
yeah.
DAO.
No, good point. I only brought it
Yeah.
up because it was also on that Ethereum Foundation grant. I'm like, oh yeah, we don't really have any identifiers, which again, I don't really care about. It's about protecting whatever entity legally you guys are trying to set up. But
Yeah, I mean, they're a $1 billion foundation. If we get down to that road, then we'll have the funds to figure it out.
fair, very fair. I mean, even
I
something
just
as
meant in terms
simple
of
as
gender, actually.
So,
Yeah.
right. I think Garrett was talking about civil resistance, but Feems is talking about diversity, so that we don't just pick like a
oh yeah, I
handful
was
of
just
white
talking about
dudes
civil
for the
resistance.
grants. Yeah, do you think that we should include a question like an optional question that just asks about someone's identity?
I mean, I would love to have, right now, at least from the sounds of voices, you've got, 3 males that are running things right now, not because it was designed that way, but just because, that's how it turned out. That's one of the reasons why I don't want to try and say, hey, the screening committee does this. But instead, it's like, yeah, we're going to make sure that every single one gets looked through. But I want other people to say, hey, can I look through them? Can I like give my feedback? Because I mean, you're absolutely right. Like right now, even if we put a bunch of questions to try to ensure, diversity, like it's not like the screening committee, it's not yet, which is why we really do need everybody else from the community like weighing in on things and bringing forward their concerns and getting more involved, because it is very hard in a pseudo anonymous world. I mean, it's hard enough when you know people and you can put these explicit questions. It's even harder when that's only a halfway an expectation. Um, so I mean, we definitely need the help of the community in order to fight that as much as we can. But right now, it hasn't been like the number one thought process, because it's a hard problem to solve.
People have already been identifying themselves to include much more diversity. There are these like Boys Club with crypto women's groups, and Bankless. We have Bankless Africa. I think that we have to kind of acknowledge that if we don't, then it will be homogenous, and not in terms of just grants, but also who participates, what leadership looks like. I think that having those types of identifiers, or having that, I don't think it's out of created those pathways to
So
mitigate those as well, right?
Well,
yeah, and I do agree, but my only pushback on that, again, with us all being pseudo anonymous, is like if we just say, like, what was that NFT project that said they were the first all women NFT project? Like
World
they
of
did
Women.
they said that they were all these things that everybody wanted, and because we're not all docs, they were able to say it even though it wasn't true. So it's like, with us not knowing who people are, with saying like self-identify as this or that, um, are you actually getting that diversity, or is it just like you get to feel good because you think you have it?
well, because we're so new, and again, this is all just ground foundational stuff. I mean, are there really any barriers? And I'm asking this sincerely. Are there barriers to entry um, for diversity? Just because me, Stubbs, and Maiko were actually, we were working here, and no one else really volunteered to commit to this, this particular work we're doing. That's why we're doing it, but it's not like we had to push someone out or, ignore anyone. It was really just based on our contributions. So if there are any barriers, I could totally understand that. I just don't see them right now.
One of the things with like diversity, inclusion, and why it's important, despite what you're saying, Garrett, is that like there are systemic forces that have oppress like particular identities of people, that makes them less capable of being involved. So just the fact that like someone has a nice laptop that they can use to get involved in this stuff, or the fact that like this space is already dominated by white men, kind of makes people feel like less inclined to be included because of the sort of systemic oppression that's already prevalent everywhere. So it takes like an effort to include people, but it is like a really sensitive issue for some of the reasons that Stubbs brought up. And like, if you put a question on there asking somebody to identify their race or their gender or their sexual orientation, it's like, either you put that question on because you want to discriminate against people, or you put the question on because you want to, you know, include people. And either way, you're kind of like seeding the kind of response that you're going to get. And I'm curious, themes, like if you have an idea of like a specific implementation for how we could do it, because I would be definitely interested. One of the things I wanted to ask you guys too is if you wanted me to make a Spanish translation of the whole application, and I almost did it, but then I thought, well, if we do get somebody who applies for the grant who only speaks Spanish, then are we gonna, is the community gonna be able to engage like with them in the Discord server? Or should
True.
that be like a role that I take and that other people can take too, as like Spanish speakers and perhaps other languages as well, so that we're not just including people from like English speaking languages and English speaking countries. But
So I think the translation would be awesome because you're like, even if they can communicate perfectly well in English, they may be more comfortable going over the application in Spanish. So I think that like I think it'd be awesome. Any community members who want to translate it to every single language, I think we should definitely support and push that because you know, even taking the step that it is like that to say, hey, not only do we're okay with people who don't have English as their first language, it's a, you know, we want everyone here and we want them to be able to read all of this in their native tongue.
The only thing with that is that it will prevent other people who don't particularly speak that language from assessing that application. So it could be assumed that because we're all talking in English and our Discord is all in English, that when the applications are open to the community, everybody has access to those applications in order to vote person in. And if it's in another language of which the majority of the community doesn't speak, only a few number of people will be able to assess that application. And if it is like if it's like picking the winner by numbers, like by the amounts of votes that they get, that could also limit them as well.
right. Actually, and I just had another thought as far as like inclusion goes. It like, to me, like the solution would be less about just kind of identifying whether somebody is like a minority identity, and more like, where do we put the applications? Like, where do people actually have access to the applications? Like, if we put the applications out in places that we already know is like kind of occupied by an outsized portion of white men, then most of the applications that come in are going to be white men. But if we put the applications in places where, for example, people don't already have their own laptop that they're using to, like, you know, roll around on Twitter, like they can actually use these funds to buy a laptop, and that can be the way that they use the grant to start working in DAOs, you know. And like, those are the kinds of people who, like, I would personally want to include, and like who I would want this grant to go towards are like people who don't actually have the resources to get involved, and that's why they're not in the space already. I mean, I realize that brings up a lot of other issues as far as like, you know, we're looking for people who are already sort of proficient in DAOs and kind of understand the concept already. But yeah, I don't know if that made any sense, but.
Would that be another grant though? Like, would that be like starting a DAO journey type of grant rather than this one?
I mean,
Maybe.
if it truly were that example of like not having a laptop, then you know I think that they would be kind of disqualified from the grant just by the fact that like if they don't have access to a laptop, then they probably aren't working in DAOs yet, which means that they aren't right for this grant. Um, But, you know, obviously there are a lot of situations where it's like, there'd be a lot of different situations that are very similar that wouldn't disqualify them from this grant. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I can see how that could happen. I think, I mean, I don't want us to get like stopped and not be able to even start this program and start giving out grants because we don't know how to be inclusive enough and like where we want to be eventually. But so my question would be like, what can we do for this first grant round to help make sure that it isn't completely biased without you know, because obviously we have the team that we have right now. How do you have any like suggestions on how we can do this where we can move forward with the expectation that obviously we always need to get better, but you know, if we can't get started at all, there is no better and we can't add value to anyone.
Hi
The
guys,
more,
things.
sorry, what I was gonna say, there's only like, in order, like one is either specifying one of the positions for one of those identifiers. So like, you know, women, non-binary sort of individuals who then will have the consent to identify themselves to apply for that particular one. And another thing is really proactive outreach within the DAO punks community. So like everybody telling everybody that they know, and you know, DAO punks like I know is a little bit diverse. Like there are women and there are like people of color and things like that. So it's really more about like a proactive community approach to say like, hey, we want to diversify this. Like, please let every single person know. You know, and like using maybe the different channels that some of the DAO punks are in to let them know that, you know, I think that's really the best thing that you can do. Like if you don't want to have one specifically for that particular types of identifier, for the recipient, proactive outreach and just ensuring that like we let everybody know who does fit, you know, those types of different communities know that the grant is available for them to apply.
Yeah, I think that that's the right approach personally.
At this stage, yeah.
I do think that is somewhat naturally happening as well, though. But yes, I totally get it.
And Joey, you were going to say something?
Yeah, thanks. I was just gonna really quickly, just regarding the last 2 points about diversity and also language about the application. And what first came to my mind was, you know, in Bankless DAO, there's diversity and the international media nodes that I think would be. I mean, I'm happy to like, if it's okay with you, like speak to them and try and understand how like those two issues, like how would they handle those two issues, since those are things like they focus on. Like for the international media node, I'm sure that they, and I know Ornella is also part of our DAO, but I think she may be stretched. There may be people who are Spanish speakers that are able to help with maybe translating the application. So those are, I think, like low-hanging fruit we could probably like try and look at. I know with diversity, it's a bit more complex to have a look at. But what I was going to say outside of those two things was, I think regarding what we're trying to do for the grants application, I think it would be good if we try to, because this is the impression I have, so pardon me, but it feels like we're not super clear yet on exactly who it is we're trying to help and how we want to help them. Like I think initially, CB, you were talking about, you know, potentially maybe if we could partner with other programs that were already had the groundwork for a roadmap of how to, you know, assist somebody in their DAO journey. And Themes, I think you made the point of maybe us trying to capture that value like here on DAO Punks and trying to provide that roadmap. But providing that roadmap, it then brings the complexity of trying to expand what the expectations and the application are so that people can identify themselves as if they're the best person to receive the grant. And I think all of this is maybe stemming from maybe the clarity of who it is, what we're trying to do, who we're trying to help, and how we can help them. So that was my general impression, like listening in on the call. If there's any any way to assist, like I'm happy to help as well, because I think it will also help shape what we're trying to do also for the newsletter, I think.
So, the issue that I see with, saying that we don't know who we're trying, like, it's the only way to make it more clear and more specific is if we want to start excluding certain, skill sets, demographics, things like that. Like right now, the reason why we are saying, hey, let's make sure that we have different resources, whether it be kernel, whether it be, Ethernaut DAO, whatever it is, we want to curate all these different resources so that we don't have to exclude certain people. And so it actually is a little bit intentional that we're not being more specific, and that's so that whoever it is can come in and say, hey, I need some funding in order to like switch to the DAO lifestyle. And that's all we really want to know, is to make sure that like they need a little bit of funding, they have a plan for what this funding is going to get them. Like, hey, the reason why they need funding is so that they can, spend the next 2 weeks getting their where they're still putting in 20 hours, but they can also spend some time getting, insurance set up through Opolis, and take on a few of those opportunities that they could have done if they'd had an extra 5 hours in their week, but since they didn't have that time, they couldn't do it. So it makes it easier to judge the applications, and it makes it easier to write questions and all of that if we make it more specific. But then we have to start excluding people, and we were specifically trying not to do that.
Yeah, well said. That's the balance. That's the way I saw it as well.
Well, I think we have to be careful too, not to back ourselves into any corners as well, because like this space is evolving fast, and like I mean, even my impression of what a DAO was has changed over the last 6 months, and I think a lot of people it has as well. And so it's like we have to just, if we get too specific, we might fall behind the curve.
True. Well, we are past the hour now, so I just wanted to be conscious of time and at least state, what I thought would be a good next step. So, as far as the questions and the docs, what I'm going to do right now after this meeting is make sure to get all of them pinned in the appropriate places with the right docs, the right access, the right people, because I think the goal should be to finish off those questions, Mike Obishi already put together, the actual application questions. So, I'll invite everyone here again, and I'll invite the community and the channel, but just to, really take another hard look at this and finalize that. I think that's a key piece. Any other like key pieces that, either Stubbs or Maiko, you think, by next week we should have like done?
So I'll just say that like the application is done. We had some pretty good community input on the document that I put out there last week, and I changed them up a little bit, and I think it's in a pretty good place. I dropped the link to the tally form in the grants channel, so check that out. I think it's looking pretty sharp. It's gonna aesthetically be different once it's actually embedded in the website. I'm gonna have, right now there's a banner at the top that's some of our DAOpunk art, but I'm gonna have that banner be the entire backdrop for the page, and the lettering is gonna be in white, kind of like the homepage of DAOpunks.io. So aesthetically it'll be a little bit different, but basically you can click through, check out the questions, the questions have like some functionality. So if you, I mean, we can walk through it at a different time, but that's ready to go. And I talked to our web dev about embedding it into liberate.daopunks.io. Do you guys like that as the subdomain for the application, or do you have an idea for a different one?
Well, I mean, what about simply just grants.daopunks? I mean, just to keep it simple.
Yeah, totally.
Just my thought, but I'll open it up to you guys too. So I know we want to be creative.
Apply.
Or apply, that's a good one.
Yeah, I was just working with Stubbs' Liberation Fund thing.
I know.
but
I was like, let's have this, and then at the same time, I'm saying let's have it totally simple. So I know I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here.
Yeah. Well, I'm totally happy to make it just grants. I also like it being simple and not confusing. That was one of the optimizations I made on this last round of editing, is kind of trying to make it less confusing. So if I used any kind of like inside lingo, I made sure to kind of clarify what I was talking about so people know how to answer the question. And yeah, so what do we want to use for this subdomain? Do you want to do grants or apply?
I mean, I'd probably say just for now do apply, just so that it's short and easy. Really, really quick, and it's a little bit off topic. So themes, if we have one more spot right now, I mean, we could up it on the gitbook that I am trying to kind of create, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, where it's like, kind of that pendulum of too detailed or not detailed enough, and obviously, the way you were seeing it, it's like a lot of the stuff has been, these internal discussions where it's like we're really getting into the details, but if you're not part of the phone or part of the call, you don't know that. If you have the time and or bandwidth, I would love to get you looking at the Gitbook a little bit, as well, so that you can be like, hey, there's a glaring hole right here that, for me is just so obvious that I forget that it's not there, because I've said it to myself 1,000 times. So if you would be willing to help with that, I think that'd be really helpful.
Sure.
Cool. I will get you access after this.
And then also, like, if you can give me time frames of like when you'd like feedback, or if it's as is, I'm really good with that. I have enough bandwidth to kind of move my availability for some things, to prioritize some tasks. So just let me know.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, guys. On that note, Bushi, any other last notes, or should we wrap up for today? Because we do have the governance call, quote unquote, which that's tomorrow at, check the calendar for your local time, but that's also going to be more grants related discussion, maybe more on the selection process within it, but still grants related. This is our main focus now, so feel free to join us tomorrow for the governance call as well.
Yeah, it sounds great. Yeah, I'm making some progress and a lot of good points brought up. So yeah, I appreciate it.
Cool. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you guys. See ya.